Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France, who conquered nearly all of continental Europe, a military genius so brilliant that 7 nations had to unite just to stop him. A man so feared that kings lost sleep over his name. And one more thing, the one thing almost everyone can tell you without hesitation: he was incredibly short, so short in fact that 20th century psychologists named an entire personality disorder after him, the Napoleon Complex. The idea that small men overcompensate for their lack of height through dominance, aggression, and an obsessive hunger for power. You know this. Your school taught you this. Movies have shown you this. 200 years of jokes have been built on this single, seemingly unshakable fact. The whole world has agreed on it. And here is the problem with things the whole world has agreed on. Sometimes, nobody bothered to check. Let's start with the most credible document we have: Napoleon's own death certificate, recorded by his personal physician, Francesco Antomarchi, in 1821. That document listed his height as 5 feet, 2 inches, in the French measurement system of the time. That single number traveled across the world, reprinted in history books, cited in encyclopedias, quoted in classrooms for generations. It became the official proof that Napoleon was indeed a small man. But here is what was almost never taught alongside that number. The French pouce, the French inch, was not the same unit as the British inch we use today. One French pouce measured 2.71 centimeters. One modern inch measures only 2.54 centimeters. A small difference on paper. But when you convert those 5 feet, 2 inches, correctly from French units into modern measurements, Napoleon's recorded height becomes approximately 169 to 170 centimeters. That is 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 7 inches. A number that changes everything. And it is not just the death certificate. 3 contemporary sources who were closest to Napoleon in life recorded the same thing. First, his personal valet, Constant. Second, General Gourgaud, the man who accompanied Napoleon into exile. Third, his physician, Antomarchi. All 3 placed his height at just over 5 feet, 2 pouces, in French units. When correctly converted, modern historians consistently place Napoleon's height between 167 and 170 centimeters. Now, that number must be understood in context, the context of his era. According to anthropometric data compiled by researchers and cited by institutions including the University of Chicago, the average height of a French male between 1800 and 1820 was approximately 164 to 165 centimeters. That means Napoleon was not merely average, he was, by the standards of his own time and his own country, slightly above average. Encyclopædia Britannica, History.com. Multiple peer-reviewed historical sources have all confirmed this conversion. This is not a fringe theory. This is not a minority opinion. This is established academic consensus, a correction that has been sitting in the historical record for decades, waiting for this popular imagination to catch up. But here is where it gets interesting. If Napoleon was of average height, or even slightly above average, why did so many people who actually saw him in person describe him as appearing small? The answer lies in one of Napoleon's most deliberate and most consequential military decisions. Napoleon personally selected tall, physically imposing men for his imperial guard, the elite corps that surrounded him at all times. According to historical military records, the minimum height requirement for the grenadiers of the Imperial Guard was approximately 5 feet 6 inches in French measurements, equivalent to nearly 178 centimeters in modern terms, far above the European average of that era. Think about what that means. Wherever Napoleon went, he was surrounded by men who stood 10 to 15 centimeters taller than most people around them. Anyone observing Napoleon beside his own guards would quite naturally perceive the emperor as small. Even his generals, his brothers, and his wife, Josephine, were reportedly taller than him, not because Napoleon was short, but because he was consistently placed next to men who were chosen specifically for being exceptionally tall. There is one more piece of kindling that fed this fire, a nickname given to Napoleon by his own troops, born from admiration. That was later stripped of all its context and turned into a weapon. His soldiers called him Le Petit Caporal, the Little Corporal. On the surface, it sounds like confirmation. It sounds like even the men who served under him acknowledged his small size. But the origin of that nickname has nothing to do with physical stature. It was born at the Battle of Lodi in 1796, when a 27-year-old Napoleon climbed down from his command position and personally helped aim artillery on the front line, a job typically performed by a common corporal. His battle-hardened veterans, most of them older than their young general, gave him the name as a term of deep affection, acknowledging his courage, his youth, and his willingness to fight beside them rather than above them. In French, the word petit can carry warmth and endearment, the way one might affectionately call someone, my little one, without any reference to size at all. Napoleon's enemies, particularly the British, took that word, erased the warmth behind it, and left the world with only one translation: small. Now we arrive at the man most responsible for the lie. His name was James Gillray, a British caricaturist widely regarded by historians as the father of the political cartoon. Gillray was a propaganda genius operating in London during the height of the Napoleonic Wars, and crucially, in his earliest depictions of Napoleon from around 1798, the French general appeared as a normal-sized man, dangerous, arrogant, power-hungry, but physically unremarkable. What changed everything was 1803. Britain and France had resumed open war after a brief peace. Over 100,000 French troops had gathered at Boulogne, preparing for a cross-channel invasion of England. Panic spread across the British public, and it was in that atmosphere of national fear that Gillray, who, according to some historical accounts, had been on the government payroll since 1797, created his most enduring character, Little Boney. In a caricature published on May 24th, 1803, titled Maniac Ravings, or Little Boney in a Strong Fit, Napoleon was depicted as a tiny raging child, flipping furniture, tearing his hair, wearing boots far too large for his body, with an enormous bicorn hat that nearly swallowed him whole. This was not merely satire. This was a calculated psychological operation. Gillray's caricature did not just become popular, it became the defining image of Napoleon Bonaparte for the entire English-speaking world. and eventually far beyond. Copies were displayed in coffee houses across Britain. Other cartoonists adopted the little Boney template and pushed it further. Napoleon was drawn as a baby in one cartoon, as a fox in another, and by 1804, Gillray depicted him as a 6-inch Lilliputian, a literal tiny person from Jonathan Swift's fiction. What made this propaganda so devastatingly effective was a circumstance Napoleon could not overcome. Inside France, he controlled the press completely. No critical coverage, no unflattering images could be published, but he had no power over what was printed in London. Napoleon even sent diplomatic messages to the British government demanding the cartoons be stopped. The British ministers simply ignored him. The little Boney image crossed the Atlantic into the United States, was adopted by artists across continental Europe, and within a single decade had become the standard visual representation of Napoleon across the Western world. A cartoon, a deliberate fiction, and it outlasted every battle he ever fought. There is a painful irony buried in this story. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who built one of the largest empires in human history, who defeated coalition after coalition of European powers, whose legal reforms still form the backbone of French civil law today, came to understand too late that the most dangerous weapon ever used against him was not a cannon, it was a pen. According to multiple historical sources, near the end of his life, in exile on the island of St. Helena, Napoleon reflected on the damage Gillray's caricatures had done to his reputation. He is reported to have said that Gillray did more than all the armies of Europe to bring me down. An emperor who was feared across an entire continent, admitting that one British cartoonist accomplished what hundreds of thousands of soldiers could not. The lie did not die with Napoleon in 1821. It lived on, migrating into school textbooks, into popular jokes, into psychology literature, into Hollywood films, and into the casual conversations of people who have never once questioned what they were told, because that is what a well-made lie does. It does not need to be defended. It just needs to be repeated. So let us be clear about what actually happened. Napoleon Bonaparte was born in 1769 in Corsica. Every credible historical source, when applying the correct unit conversion, places his height between 167 and 170 centimeters. Average to slightly above average for a French man of his era. He surrounded himself with guards who were selected specifically for their exceptional height, creating a visual illusion that reinforced a false impression. His beloved nickname, Le Petit Caporal, was a term of affection from his troops, with no reference to his physical size. And then James Gillray, operating as a wartime propagandist in 1803, manufactured the character of the miniature Napoleon, a fictional creature built to diminish an enemy Britain genuinely feared. The world swallowed that fiction whole and never looked back. But the implications of this story reach far beyond Napoleon's height. If a lie this simple, this man is short, could survive for more than 200 years, embedded in academic textbooks, psychological terminology, and global popular culture, then the question we must sit with is this: what else are we believing without having ever checked? Napoleon himself is often attributed with saying, though historians still debate, whether the words were truly his. What is history but a fable agreed upon? Whether he said it or not, it captures something profoundly true about how the past is constructed and passed down. The version of Napoleon that most of the world carries in its head was designed by a cartoonist paid to discredit an enemy. It was built on a unit conversion error that nobody bothered to check. It was amplified by 2 centuries of uncritical repetition, and today it is still being taught as fact in classrooms around the world. Napoleon's height is just the beginning. Nearly everything we think we know about him, the hand tucked inside the coat, the volcanic temper, the pathological ambition, deserves the same scrutiny. And that is exactly what this channel exists to do. Because the real version of history is almost always stranger, richer, and more unsettling than the version we were handed. Now, here's the question I want to leave with you. What else have you believed your entire life without ever once questioning it? Write it in the comments. We read every single one. And if this video made you see something familiar in a completely different way, share it with someone who needs to hear it.